You lift a curved silver scalpel. Versailles hums. Roses and rot share the air. On velvet, a crown glitters beside the instrument that might save a king. Perfume thickens the room. Whispers thin into ritual, then silence. He cannot sit long, he must still appear eternal. Metal waits. Gold remembers. Flesh negotiates with ceremony and time. What system asks men to worship a body that pleads for help? Step closer, the performance begins, and the price will outlive the actor. Velvet curtains billow. The scent breaks like a rehearsed smile. Somewhere, a bell rings for mass. Duty drowns the diagnosis. Steel seeks an opening. No prayer can close. Whose salvation matters more, the man or the monarchy he animates? Credibility. Aside, 1715. Versailles. Court, ritual, and pathology. Evidence suggests. The century trusted balance more than cause. Four humors governed bodies. Vapors governed streets. Prayer governed fear. Water, many believed, opened pores and doors for illness and spirits alike. Soap yielded to sachets. Confession outpaced consultation. Under chrism's sheen, the anointed body blurred medicine with theology. Divine, right-shaped clinical choices before a pulse was taken. To wound a king was to disturb an order that claimed heaven's warranty. Amputation sounded like treason recited with steel. Pain was read as providence, cure as confirmation. What surgeon argues with a crown that calls itself cosmic? Ritual completed the doctrine. The lever transformed dressing into liturgy. Attendance converted proximity into power. A silk shirt became a sacrament of access. One fold, a career. If the monarch grimaced, etiquette translated it into majesty. Protocol absorbed symptoms the way velvet absorbs light. Scholars debate how often bathing was refused outright. Evidence suggests moderation, not abstinence, turned into theater that prized scent over soap. Perfume thickened. Windows staged breezes. Incense wrote alibis in the air. The result was not denial, but choreography. Sickness learned to speak courtly, then hid in the chorus. Incentives braided tighter than laces. Courtiers prospered by shielding discomfort with ceremony. Perfumers expanded guilds. Florists multiplied beds and budgets. Portraitists painted angles where breath could not travel. Even cushions acquired rank. A soft seat could become a state secret. Doctrine constrained doctors. University Latin debated Galen while corridors debated access. A physician served both a patient and an emblem. He measured pulse and precedent in the same visit. Which reading takes priority when the room genuflects before the chart? Etiquette was a filter more powerful than gauze. Requests moved slowly to preserve grace. Urgency bent to pageantry's clock. A delay looked like deference, not danger. Words tiptoed. Diagnoses learned euphemism. The sick room became a chapel that borrowed instruments from a shop. Ancient writers report that sovereigns were bodies, politic as well as flesh. Hence the double bookkeeping. One ledger for ceremonies, one ledger for cloth. When costs rose, accountants blamed fashion, not fever. Yet the numbers whisper logistics. Flowers, resins, repairs, reserved chairs. Debate the motives. The receipts still breathe. Steel lurked at the edge of belief. A blade could promise relief while threatening the myths that fed the court. So treatment drifted toward what a crown could tolerate. Manage the smell, shield the posture, maintain the hour. In that compromise, pain learned patience, and ritual learned haste. Credibility. Aside, 1661, 1715. France. Religion, politics, medicine. Scholars debate. Evidence suggests. Open the archive. Let paper breathe. We follow ink through corridors and eras. Bias rides alongside. Every note cares about an audience, even when sealed. So we stage a trial of sources, not a pageant of pain. Listen for patterns that repeat when witnesses disagree. Ambassador dispatches speak in careful thunder. They measure distance, scent, and decorum because policy hides in manners. Some exaggerate. Enemies always smell more loudly in reports. Others write plain, counting minutes before faint courtiers requested air. What does consistency mean when pride edits memory overnight? Court journals map ceremony like an engineer's manual. They read illness as timing, delays, shortened steps, added screens. A cushion becomes a cable. A hallway becomes a valve. The body's discomfort reroutes traffic as if Versailles were plumbing. Etiquette codifies the change. Later readers misname it rumor. Portraits testify without speaking. Angles stretch stature. Hands hide tremor. Fabric distracts the gaze. Repeated motifs reveal constraints more than vanities. We find reshaped thrones, elevated platforms, and longer canes in inventories. Is this style or structure capitulating to strain? Perfume appears as numbers before it becomes a cloud. Ledgers grow barbs where roses grow stems. Costs spike during difficult weeks. Receipts for resins, citrus oils, and incense repeat near council days. Windows once decorative become planned apertures for airflow. If fashion alone explains this, why does timing track symptoms? Credibility aside, 1680s, 1710s, Versailles, court records and diplomatic dispatches. Evidence suggests. Scholars debate. Medical notes switch the language. Now we meet setons, fistula probes, and dressings changed by candlelight. No anesthesia, no germ theory. Caution served as antiseptic. Surgeons balanced humility before rank, with audacity before tissue. They documented technique, not torment. Their quiet makes later echoes loud. How a fistula becomes a system problem. An anal fistula is a persistent tunnel between rectum and skin. 17th century surgeons slit and drained the tract, urging it to granulate. There was no anesthesia. Infection lived in instrument, air, and linen. Pain was negotiated with ritual, prayer, and restraint. Progress meant tolerable seepage. A king's body doubles as infrastructure. Cushions, corridors, and timetables adapt. Costs hide inside etiquette. Logistics masquerade as luxury. That is why perfume budgets and audience lengths count as medical data, according to court expenditure ledgers and contemporaneous surgical notes. Credibility aside, 1686, Paris and Versailles. Surgery and court logistics. Evidence suggests. The celebrated operation enters as theater and threshold. News spread faster than sutures could set. Pamphlets crowned skill with myth. The blade became a character, its silver curved like rhetoric. Public gratitude framed discipline for a craft long ranked below physicians. Did necessity create modern surgery, or just rehearse it earlier? We review the autopsy without spectacle. Language stays cool. Conclusions speak in tempered clauses. Left-sided decay is described with professional reserve, not sensational flourish. Intestinal length and parasites are noted as observations, not morals. What matters is correlation across accounts, not a race toward horror. Near the margins, scholars debate how swiftly the body changed. Weight estimates ride on wardrobes, horse mounts, and tailor revisions. We find reinforced chairs and altered stirrups in mundane orders. Patterns cluster in the years after surgery, then stabilize briefly. Inference is careful here. Numbers imply, but they do not shout. Credibility aside, 1690s, 1715, Paris, Versailles. Inventories and medical summaries. Evidence suggests. Scholars debate. Dental crisis accounts disagree in tone, not in direction. Some describe extractions in one cruel session, others spread the timeline. All converge on impaired speech, controlled drooling, and altered dining habits. Cup lids appear. Napkins multiply. Audiences move closer to hear. Certainty sits at medium. Details vary with allegiance and style. Perfume returns as industry rather than rumor. Guild papers mark apprenticeships. Taxes record shipments and seasonality. Grass and Paris build a marriage of field and furnace. Public civility borrows fragrance like armor worn under silk. Policy often smells like consolation when pain cannot retreat. Credibility. Aside. Late 17th, early 18th century. Ile-de-France and Provence. Economic and guild records. Evidence suggests. Diplomatic stench may be rhetoric, yet meetings outdoors increase. Requests for gardens or galleries align with sensitive weeks. Some envoys write clinically, others theatrically, depending on recipients. When weather allows, courtyards host conversations that usually lived indoors. Assign confidence at medium. Hyperbole survives best in archives. We test a colorful claim, the ribbon code of warning days. Evidence thins. Diaries note signals, not standardized colors. Anecdotes cluster late and lean toward gossiping memoirs. Alternative explanations include etiquette shifts and mourning protocols. Confidence sits low. The story survives because it is tidy. Credibility. Aside. 1700s. Versailles. Memoirs versus procedural notes. Scholars debate. Low confidence. Ventilation emerges as a quiet protagonist. Architects sketch openings. Stewards time the window pull. Airflows are plotted like choreography to steer discomfort elsewhere. The practice likely aided many, not just one throne. Assign medium confidence. Paperwork is practical, not confessional. Chamberlains keep time, like physicians keep pulse. Audience lengths shorten on specific feast days and treatment cycles. Music covers pauses. Processions absorb fatigue without scandal. Servants become buffers, translating aches into acceptable tempo. Is compassion a skill in such rooms, or a uniform? We consult physicians outside the court's orbit. Journals debate fistula techniques. Some praise setons, others wider incisions. A continental fashion briefly celebrates curative cuts among nobles. Imitation travels faster than controlled proof. Reputations rise by anecdote. Ancient writers report similar waves around earlier sovereign ailments. Credibility. Aside. 1686, 1700. European medical print culture. Ancient writers report. Scholars debate. Numbers, again, refuse melodrama yet map pressure. Laundry demands. Climb during private liturgies and evening receptions. Linen counts spike with dignitary visits and seasonal heat. Extra screens and chairs appear on short notice, then vanish. Logistics speaks in verbs. Replace, air, move, repeat. The autopsy's afterlife includes preservation challenges. Embalmers wrote about timing, not spectacle. Speed became their metric. Lead, resin, and ceremony converged as crisis management. Courtiers later softened phrases for bulletins and sermons. Official language prefers silence, where detail might injure majesty. Credibility. Aside. 1715. Saint-Denis and Versailles. Funerary practice and official communications. Evidence suggests. We step back and grade our certainties. High. A serious perianal disease, treated surgically in 1686. High. Ritual adjustments around the sovereign's comfort and schedule. Medium. Perfume logistics influencing diplomacy and room selection. Low. Codified ribbon signals depicting daily pain states. Across these layers, a pattern keeps returning. An individual condition reorganizes a collective machine without admitting defeat. Language bows. Costs reclassify. Architecture learns discretion. The palace becomes a patient that refuses the word patient. What else could Versailles be under such compressive grace? We end this chamber with method, not verdict. Trust convergences. Test theatrics against receipts and timing. Prefer plain records when passions run hot around the page. Where sources sing, listen. Where they whisper, measure twice. The next act will place lives inside this furnace and watch choices harden. Credibility. Aside. 1661. 1715. France, Europe. Multi-source synthesis. Evidence suggests. Scholars debate. Mourning begins with choreography, not breath. Pages memorize distances. Ushers memorize glances. Musicians memorize delays. The lever shrinks by minutes, yet swells with meaning. A sovereign stands, sits, stands again, each motion translated into etiquette. How long can protocol hold posture while pain edits the script? A valet adjusts a screen as if aligning stars. Another folds a cloak to the thickness of mercy. A third swaps cushions the way engineers switch valves. Furniture learns triage. Fabric learns discretion. When did upholstery become a public office with private vows? Whispers drift faster than orders. A chamberlain reads the room like a pulse, then trims the schedule. Courtiers study the angle of a hat and infer the hour. Signals exist, but seldom as legend insists. Colors wander with memory. What survives is a custom. Say less, do more, keep air moving. The hallway becomes a conduit, the antechamber, a pressure gate. Doors open a breath sooner when steps falter behind them. A steward cues a window to draft against embarrassment. Nothing is called treatment. Everything is called taste. Does language save dignity or merely relocate it? Portraitists enter like diplomats of light. They tilt the frame, ease the jaw, stretch the stance within decorum. Props acquire gravitas. Cane, glove, embroidered order. Distraction with lineage. Paint conceals tremor as history, not deception. Is a flattering angle a lie or a treaty with time? Clerks perform arithmetic that touches the body without saying its name. Linen counts rise near feast days and council nights. Repairs to chairs repeat with the rhythm of meetings. Tailors whisper to carpenters. Carpenters answer with reinforcements. Account books become diaries written in numbers, not tears. By afternoon, scent becomes logistics. Flour trays rotate like sentries. Resins simmer on cue. Food meets clove and citrus to escort conversation, not taste. Pomanders pass between sleeves like secret handshakes. When fragrance carries policy, who owns the air? Etiquette masters teach conversion. Ache to grace, pause to solemnity. A grimace becomes majesty through the grammar of stillness. A shorter audience reads as mercy for petitioners, not relief for one. The system shelters the symbol by absorbing the symptom. At what point does kindness turn into concealment? Messengers learn detours that spare endurance. Courtyards host councils when weather returns favors. A gallery absorbs the echo of a cane without comment. Officials adjust pacing, so decisions travel, even when feet cannot. Is efficiency a mask or a ministry? Consent mutates under ceilings, gilded with theology. To suggest a cut challenges the charter of anointing. To suggest endurance honors a tradition that predates the wound. So, choices curve toward pageantry, not speed. Who risks truth when truth might fracture a crown? Credibility. Aside, 1686, 1687. Versailles, court practice and material culture. Evidence suggests, scholars debate. Closed-loop expertise at court. Closed courts compress feedback. Physicians serve an image as carefully as they serve a pulse. Courtiers buffer bad news. Artisans monetize concealment. Error signals are perfumed, not published. Famous operations spread by imitation. Praise circulates faster than controlled proof. Presentism tempts judgment. Within their doctrine, balancing humors and masking odors read as rational. Yet closed loops raise risk. When stakes are divine, dissent resembles treason, and trials turn theatrical. According to ambassador dispatches, guild accounts, and etiquette manuals. Interactive pause. Your turn. If you were an ambassador, would you insist on meeting outdoors to save face, or endure the gallery to keep favor? Credibility. Aside, 1661 to 1715. Versailles and foreign courts. Diplomacy and ritual. Evidence suggests. Scholars debate. Scent begins. As ornament, then learns ambition. A palace already rich in flowers becomes a market for invisibility. Every petal in resin earns its wage, not in beauty, but in cover. To smell nothing is to smell success. Absence becomes the goal. When did fragrance stop announcing pleasure and start declaring policy. Gardeners replace bowls of blooms with the rhythm of a clock. 500 changes in a single hour is not botany. It is defense. Rose, jasmine, and tuberose march in rotations as strict as guard shifts. Failure is measured in the pause before a visitor blinks. If a nose flinches, the wall has cracked. In kitchens, cooks learn the lexicon of clove and citrus. Dishes steam with oils, chosen for their reach, not their flavor. Stews carry nutmeg to the head of the table. Roasts carry thyme to the back. Wine decants through orange peel and cinnamon before it meets the lips. The meal becomes a mask. Taste is the alibi. Ladies of rank cradle pomanders like relics. Silver globes hold ambergris, musk, or vinegar-soaked sponges. They sway in hands, hang from belts, or hide in sleeves. Gesture disguises inhalation. Elegance hides precaution. Which matters more, the conversation or the courage to keep breathing? Merchants smell opportunity. Perfume guilds in Paris swell with apprentices. Grass sends caravans of petals north. Customs houses weigh barrels of lavender, bergamot, and myrtle. Tariffs rise with the tide of scent. Treaties mention aromatics alongside arms. Commerce turns the king's condition into a national export. Guild records tell a story. Invoices cannot. Journeymen work double seasons. Stillrooms run before dawn. By the 1690s, shipments peak in months when council sessions do. Coincidence is possible, but pattern is patient. Economy learns to inhale and exhale with the court. Scent becomes a border in diplomacy. Visitors write of halls where lilies outweigh marble. Some praise refinement, others note the air tastes of concealment. All agree the palace smells deliberate. Is that not its own kind of message? Fragrance travels in the folds of letters. A perfumed missive arrives in London or Vienna, the scent faint but telling. It says the court is alive, busy, and masked in civility. It does not mention what civility conceals. How many alliances are signed under such aromatic terms? Over time, the palace itself breathes with intention. Windows are opened and closed like lungs on command. Drafts are drawn to usher scent one way and truth another. The walls know when to inhale, when to exhale, which draft carries comfort, and which carries the story away. Scent's politics lie in its deniability. A cough can be blamed on incense, a shortened visit on pollen. The mask works best when it can be mistaken for fashion. When power smells sweet, who suspects the cost of its perfume? Perhaps only those who must keep the fragrance lit. Credibility aside, 1680s, 1700s, Ile-de-France, perfume guilds, and diplomatic correspondence. Evidence suggests. Scholars debate. Interactive pause. Your turn. Which would you trust more as evidence of a hidden condition? An ambassador's complaint or a surge in perfume imports? A surgeon enters where doctrine hesitates. Physicians speak in Latin. He answers in metal and cloth. His rank sits below the scholar, yet above the barber. Between velvet and lantern, he must not tremble. Who measures courage when the outcome judges the hierarchy? Charles-François. Félix, prepared as a craftsman among courtiers. He rehearsed motions, sharpened curves, and timed his breath. Practice looked like penance, confidence like treason to prudence. Technique grew in secrecy because failure would echo in marble. What school grants a diploma equal to a king's survival? The instrument mattered because language stalled. A curved silver scalpel promised precision inside a ritual space. Its shimmer borrowed legitimacy from the crown beside it. Form signaled safety. Material implied purity and respect. Can a blade be an argument when words refuse to cut? Setons and probes divided practitioners into camps. Some favored gradual draining, others cut wider, faster. Pamphlets praised outcomes in prose that smelled of loyalty. Claims multiplied where data could not yet convene. How do reputations grow in gardens, walled against dissent? Felix's success measured in recovery, not comfort, changed a corridor's pecking order. Access widened for hands once kept near basins and blood. Physicians still authored theory. Surgeons earned narrative by risk. Patrons learned the currency of gratitude in annuities and titles. Is patronage medicine's crutch or its first scaffold? Imitation followed the court's applause. Nobles sought similar operations to purchase proximity to bravery. Fashion attached itself to the wound as if to a medal. Printmakers sold scenes where steel and stoicism met. When pain becomes vogue, who is allowed to refuse? Workshops adapted to the new mystique. Toolmakers standardized curves and handles for steady grasp. Aprons thickened. Linens were prearranged to manage streams. Instruction migrated from whispered apprenticeship to semi-public demonstration. What becomes a classroom when no hall will admit the truth? Hospitals watched the theater from a distance. Charity wards copied instruments before they copied privilege. Experience pooled slowly. In notebooks smudged with wax and ash, an art gathered fragments toward a discipline without declaring victory. Can method mature where proof must masquerade as decorum? Meanwhile, physicians guarded territory with grammar. They framed surgery as necessary but subordinate. Journals granted paragraphs. Salons granted polite nods. Still, patients remembered the steadiness of hands, not footnotes. Which memory travels farther, the citation or the scar? The court case became precedent more than template. Later academies pointed backward to justify forward steps. Lectures cited courage while altering the underlying method. Reverence for an origin story disguised many revisions. Do we honor the start or the improvements that disobey it? Complaints also persisted in quieter rooms. Some memoirs paint Felix as fortunate more than groundbreaking. Others accuse rivals of envy disguised as critique. The chorus agrees only on the scale of risk. Where confidence is medium, humility must carry the weight. Abroad, surgeons wrote with a blend of awe and caution. Translations softened triumph, then sharpened debate. Cross-channel polemics ranked instruments like armies rank regiments. Standardization crept in through argument, not decree. Is consensus merely fatigue wearing a laurel? Back at Versailles, logistics learned the surgeon's rhythm. Guards understood when silence meant incision, not offense. Servants mastered clean paths for instruments and linen. Candles were spaced for shadowless hands, not ambiance. How many invisible crafts keep a single gesture safe? Felix's own reward stitched pride to peril. A pension buys relief. A reputation buys enemies. Legacy, however, depends on archives that prefer ceremony. So the blade endures as rumor polished by need. What survives when paper protects power before truth? Credibility. Aside. 1686, 1700. Paris faculties gild records, surgical pamphlets. Evidence suggests. Scholars debate. Pain etiquette hardened into pedagogy. Students learned to hold, to breathe, to avert their eyes. They studied where to stand, so rank felt respected. A steady hand meant knowing both anatomy and protocol. Does bedside manner begin as choreography under gold ceilings? The line between bravado and bravery blurred. Some cases courted danger to court fame. Failures sank without witnesses. Successes acquired engravings. An art advanced by anecdotes, wrapped in heraldry. Can science begin with stories, if stories admit their limits? Eventually, institutions formalized what corridors had taught. Curricula absorbed lessons from rooms that forbade plain speech. Exams asked for technique and deference in the same breath. Titles rose that once crouched beside basins. Is legitimacy a robe granted late to work done early? We end this module where it began, at the threshold of a cut. Metal must answer questions that theology cannot. So must logistics, and the courage to revise custom. The blade no longer begs, it petitions with evidence. Who now will argue that hierarchy heals without steel? Interactive pause. Your turn. When rank collides with risk, whose judgment should prevail? The theorist who defines illness, or the hand that must enter it. Credibility. Aside, 1686, and after. France, Europe. Surgical status and court culture. Evidence suggests. Scholars debate. We return to the cut, but look outward. What began as a private tunnel in flesh became a corridor in the state. After the operation, roles inverted. Surgeons earned audiences. Physicians defended grammar. Pamphlets crowned dexterity while hiding dependence on ritual. Did a wound, not a war, do more to reorganize Versailles? Patterns sharpen when the applause fades. Reinforced chairs, altered stirrups, shortened ceremonies. These stabilize after the surgical year. Expenses migrate from emergency to routine. Novelty becomes habit. Perfume budgets plateau at a higher baseline, like scar tissue in accounts. When numbers heal, do they also harden? A counter-reading insists the scent was slander. Rivals wrote from across borders with noses tuned to mockery. Yet their requests for gardens and galleries match domestic rescheduling. When enemies and stewards agree on a change of venue, attend to the map. Is coincidence that disciplined? Credibility. Aside, 1686, 1690s. Versailles, European courts, logistics, diplomacy. Evidence suggests. Scholars debate. The throne's theology blinked briefly before reopening its eyes. A blade had violated the aura, yet saved the emblem it threatened. Hence a new paradox. Steel preserved sanctity. Ritual preserved the memory of steel. Sovereignty learned to coexist with incision without admitting dependence. Is survival less sacred when saved by hands, ranked below doctrine? Imitation followed with the gravity of fashion. Noble bodies sought similar cures to prove proximity to courage. Engravings turned pain into emblem, a wearable virtue. Success recruited imitators. Failures vanished behind upholstery and pride. What moves faster, relief, or the rumor of bravery? The palace, too, learned a second language. It spoke airflow and silence, cushions and timing alongside liturgy. Architects and stewards co-authored a manual the catechism never named. After the crisis, this manual stayed in use because it worked. Utility often inherits what reverence borrows. Reread the final month without spectacle. Gangrene advances in descriptions that avoid theater. Symptoms repeat across audiences. Servants change linens on a clock that no sermon dictates. A sovereign still signs, decrees, while breath bargains with heat and odor. Is endurance itself a policy when policy cannot amputate? How near did amputation stand? The question tempts bravado in hindsight. Temper it. To propose cutting a consecrated limb risked more than medicine. Mortality without anesthesia. Infection without antisepsis. Doctrine without precedent. These weigh on a knife. Some surgeons argued necessity. Courtiers heard blasphemy, dressed as care. According to surgical treatises of the 1710s and correspondence between court physicians and ministers. Credibility aside. August, September, 1715. Versailles, Saint-Denis. Terminal care and doctrine. Scholars debate, medium confidence. The turn, then, is methodological, not morale. When we follow receipts and timings rather than adjectives, the silhouette changes. A unique body forced a permanent retooling of protocol, not a carnival of decay. The palace became a machine for minimizing friction with dignity intact. That machine outlived its builder. Inertia replaced crisis. In that light, the rotting monarch becomes a poorer thesis. It explains appetite for scandal, not the engineering of discretion. It underestimates the competence of servants who built air into routine. It overestimates the glee of enemies who still wanted treaties signed. What persists is quieter. Logistics that learn to kneel and to move. Credibility aside. 1686, 1715. France took Europe. Synthesis across records. Evidence suggests. Scholars debate. Begin with breath, not incense. Across the centuries hinge, civility shifts from masking to managing. Urban ordinances discover drainage and distance. Private habits learn basins and cloths. Royal example matters less than municipal practicality, but influence travels. Do reforms spread as sermons or as schedules? Perfumery does not retreat. It specializes. Paris refines accords. Grass perfects supply from field to flask. Guilds codify skill. Apprenticeships proliferate with seasonal clocks. The industry sells elegance, not erasure, yet its roots remember utility. Can a luxury forget the crisis that trained it? Visual politics recalibrate as painters chase restraint. The sovereign body thins into emblem. Authority migrates to uniforms and codes. Stance says discipline, not divinity. Light favors office over flesh. Portraits of successors speak bureaucracy with satin diction. Did suffering teach a new grammar of rule? Hospitals and faculties, slower than rumor, still change. Surgery gains rooms, instruments, and a language steadier than encomium. Physicians concede space to hands that prove calm under lanterns. Case narratives grow cooler. Pride learns footnotes and failure margins. When story admits error, method arrives. Foreign chancelleries remember the scented years as etiquette, not catastrophe. Protocols for air and timing remain in diplomatic toolkits. Outdoor counsels persist when prudence meets heat or infirmity. A habit born from one body becomes best practice for many. Is wisdom sometimes an accident hardened into policy? The ledger offers our clearest epilogue. Costs settle into predictable swells near feast days and treaty weeks. Linen, resin, carpentry, and carriage hire cycle like tides. These rhythms outlive names. They are the signature of adaptation. History often signs with numbers when words are shy. Credibility. Aside, early 18th century. Paris Grasse, Versailles. Civic norms, guild records, portrait practice. Evidence suggests, my take, this is not a parable about decay. It is an anatomy of systems that protect symbols while learning to work. The king's suffering is undeniable. The court's competence is undertold. Where others chase gore, I follow gears. Do gears absolve us or show us where to intervene? Why now? Because spectacle still edits policy. We perfume problems with metrics, dashboards, and euphemisms. Institutions choreograph discomfort into ceremony. Budgets hide in customary lines. Versailles is present whenever we value image over corrective pain. Which of our rituals shelters harm in elegant silence? When sources sing, compare their melodies against ledgers and logistics. Times, places, and costs audit adjectives. Consistency across hostile pens earns trust. Assign tiers. High when independent records converge. Medium when rhetoric overlaps. Low when only memoirs glow. Name uncertainty aloud. Invite falsification rather than applause. According to ambassador dispatches, funeral inventories, guild papers, and municipal ordinances consulted together. Credibility aside, 1661, 1715, and after. France enters Europe. Historiography and method. Evidence suggests. Behind the scenes, one witness stood out for sobriety. A clerk who counted chairs taught more than a poet who counted size. Numbers are indifferent. They do not kneel. They let us see ceremony harden into maintenance, according to seating inventories and repair orders from council galleries. Open question. If we read budgets as biopsies, what else in statecraft becomes diagnosable? Which threshold, air, light, time, reveals the ailment your institution refuses to name? Subscribe, notify if this lens helps you breathe through history without the perfume. It takes courage to measure what ceremony prefers to hide. In the next story, we test another room where silence once looked like grace. Bring your questions, bring your doubt, bring your ledger. What will the numbers say this time? Credibility aside. 18th, 21st century. method, and public history. Scholars debate, evidence suggests.